I've been a subscriber for about a year now, and I've been meaning to write to you for quite some time, but it's taken me months to finally put pen to paper, so to speak, and write this. You see, I used to be a YouTuber, and I had quite a lot of subscribers too, and since this story is about some of the perils of being a big YouTuber, I think you're the perfect person to tell it. One rainy summer's evening back in 2012, I was browsing YouTube to combat some pretty severe boredom when I came across a video that was called something like Hellboy Comic Book Page Turning, and the user who uploaded the video was named Ephemeral Rift, and it consisted of him doing something incredibly boring, or so I thought. He did nothing more than exhibit a hardback compendium of Hellboy issues, and if memory serves me well, he didn't say a single word throughout the entire video. He also delicately turned the pages of the book at a rate which, while not fast by any means, was too quick to read what was written. And under any other circumstances, I might have been asking myself, why in God's name did this person feel the need to upload this? But under those particular circumstances, I got an immediate sense of the video's purpose. The man's slow, graceful movements and the sounds of the pages gently being turned was somehow phenomenally relaxing. I sat there, practically mesmerized, with my headphones turned up to 100 for the entire 15-minute duration of the video, and when it was done, I actually wanted more. And that's how I discovered Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, or you might know it as ASMR for short. The light, almost tingly sensation certain people feel whenever they're experiencing an instance of relaxing interaction with someone or something. And from that day forward, I was hooked. I soon discovered gentle whispering ASMR, or Maria as she's known to her many legions of fans, and then I moved on to ASMR requests and Heather Feather ASMR. But Ephemeral Rift was, and remains, my all-time #1 favorite, and it's crazy to think that I still watch his videos more than a decade after I first discovered them. I enjoyed his videos so much that he inspired me to create my own channel, but anyone who wants to start a serious ASMR channel will tell you it's not easy and it's not really cheap. A fairly decent camera is obviously important, but by far the most important piece of kit that you need is a top-of-the-line microphone, and for that I had to wait until my 18th birthday. My mom thought that it was a rather odd gift request, but being the wonderfully generous mother she is, she honored it, and I was in business. I made my first video in mid-January of 2013, and then with the help of all my ASMR Twitter mutuals, my account had a few dozen subscribers by the end of that week. My first video was a very simple, softly spoken poetry read, but I tried to get more and more creative with each upload, and after a while, one video in particular seemed to get way more views than any of my others. It was something like Sleep Fairy Conjures Pleasant Dreams or something, and the video was 17 minutes and 14 seconds long or so and consisted of me suggesting pleasant, relaxing things for the viewers to dream about. I put quite a lot of effort into the script and my costume, and I was over the moon to see that the video was actually getting some traction. But then came the night when that view count of my video was around 2,000, and I woke up the next morning to see that it had a grand total of over just 15,000 views. And not only that, but the number of subscribers I had jumped from a few hundred to several thousand, and my new viewers had left dozens upon dozens of comments. "Love the video," one said. "This video helped me finally get some sleep," another read. And the flattering comments went on and on and on until finally I found one that wasn't so flattering. "How am I supposed to relax when someone so ugly is talking?" said one person. "You're so annoying. Delete your account and apologize for thinking anyone wants to look at you," said another. And I was definitely a bit taken aback, as I wasn't expecting anything so rude or confrontational, but I was also very aware of the internet phenomenon known as trolling. And for anybody unfamiliar with the term, and I'm using an official definition here, trolling is when someone posts deliberately offensive or provocative messages online to incite emotional responses, which can adversely affect the target's well-being. Essentially, they don't mean the things they say. Their only goal is to hurt your feelings and ultimately demoralize you. The trouble is, it can be very difficult to discern genuine criticism from the so-called trolling. I thought encountering the trolls marked my first big test as an online creator, or ASM artist as we sometimes call ourselves. In reality, it was nothing compared to what I would eventually face. The sad fact of being a female creator online, especially if you choose to show your face on camera, is that you're going to get all kinds of horrible comments from both men and women alike. The female trolls will say things to undermine your confidence and self-esteem, and they can be viciously effective at it too. But the male trolls say things that make you afraid for your physical well-being. And at first, it can be very alarming to realize just how many sad, nasty people there are out there. But like most things in life, you can get used to anything if you remain headstrong. And over time, the negative comments bothered me less and less, until by the time I was on the verge of hitting 100,000 subscribers, I could read venom-filled comments and emails all day and not feel a thing. People talk about haters so much because they're easy to address, and most of them find a way of letting you know that they're not to be taken seriously. If someone puts "you suck, I hate you" in the subject line of an email, you learn not to read it and just delete it right away. If someone emails you a JPEG file and then you learn not to open it unless you want your entire day ruined. But what no one warns you about before you wade into these online spaces as a forward-facing creator is your fans. You can plaster F the haters on your timeline all day, every day, and no one will bat an eye. But complain about people calling themselves your fans, and you might as well delete your videos and burn your channel. I think that's why so many trolls masquerade as fans, because then you never really know who has actual concerns or who's merely concern trolling, as it's called. But even then, they're just trolls, and for the most part, their commitment to harassing you starts and ends at their keyboard. Whereas your fans, especially the less mentally stable ones, rather frequently cross that very fine line that separates supporters, who are more than welcome, from stalkers, who are anything but welcome. Just over a year after I'd started my channel, my subscriber count was sitting pretty at around 250,000, and I was producing videos at a rate of roughly one per week. I had literally thousands of regular viewers, all of whom would leave delightful words of encouragement, and I'd even rented myself a drop box down at the local post office so that fans could send me gifts and letters and such without me giving away my actual address. And at first, I was a little bit apprehensive about what people might send me. But as I said earlier, trolls tend to favor methods which require minimal effort. They're also not committed enough to pay the massive shipping fees, and since the vast majority of my viewers were in the US, they needed to be willing to pay exorbitant amounts of money in order to post things to me. That meant that all I received was the odd postcard or package of foreign snacks, and in one case, a handmade knitted octopus and a very flattering shade of purple. Things went on like that for quite some time, and I don't mean to sound too proud of myself, but it really was one of the happiest times of my life. I was getting paid for doing something I loved. Not quite enough to really live on excessively, but I didn't really give a monkey's bottom. It was the people who said that I helped them sleep or calm down or feel less depressed, and that's what made it so worthwhile. I started to wonder just how far I could take things in terms of turning my channel into something that I did full-time. Things were moving fast at that stage. PewDiePie was starting to make some serious money, so it was an exciting time in more ways than one. I felt like I had this actual big, bright future ahead of me, and then I got a letter from Will. You see, Will, who said he was 37 and also from the UK, wrote me the most beautiful letter, waxing lyrically about how much I helped him in his day-to-day life. He said that I helped him with his anxiety, that I'd helped him get a good night's sleep for the first time in years, and that he was so grateful that he wasn't sure how he could ever repay me. I always made a point of replying to people who had taken the time to write to me, so I wrote Will a brief response, thanking him for all of his love and support. It wasn't like a long letter or anything, not by any means, which made me feel a bit guilty considering that he'd written an entire page of A4 along with a postscriptum that's spilled into the reserve. But at the risk of sounding a bit cold, I didn't want him to think that I was interested in having a pen pal. It might sound ungrateful to some, but being so heavily followed and scrutinized by people you not only don't know, but can't see, it can be rather nerve-wracking sometimes. I wanted to grow my following and interact more with my viewers, but at the same time, I didn't want a stan sort of fan who was going to obsess over and then turn on me. Again, that probably sounds a bit arrogant, assuming that anyone would become obsessed with me. But the longer I operated my channel, the more I became acutely aware that there are some very loose cannons out there, and Will was one of them. I posted my reply to Will on a Monday morning on my way to work, and the vast majority of the people that I wrote return letters to didn't reply to them. Some wrote comments on my videos like, "I got your letter, it means the world to me," but most were socially adept enough to understand that I wasn't looking, like I said, for a pen pal. Will, on the other hand, didn't seem to understand that, and I got a written reply from him in my P.O. box early the following week. It was another long letter, thanking me for my reply and what a pleasant surprise it had been to hear back from me. And he went on to say that so many YouTubers simply see their audience as a means of just making money, and that I must have a pretty good heart if I take the time out of my busy day to indulge those who, and I quote, worship me. When he used the word worship, I started to feel this creepy feeling of discomfort. I really disliked the idea of people worshiping me. Being grateful that I helped them relax or sleep was one thing, but the idea that people felt anything more extreme than gratitude or affection made me feel severely uncomfortable. Yet thankfully, an attached drawing made me feel a hell of a lot better. Will had drawn a picture of me with a small note on the back saying that he was completing an art course for the Open University and that he couldn't possibly think of a more beautiful subject to practice his sketching with. Credit where credit is due. It was a very good drawing. Maybe that's just my ego talking, but I found it so touching that it washed away all the discomfort his use of the word worship brought on. I know that might sound a bit hypocritical, not wanting to be scrutinized, but then being flattered someone had drawn a picture of me. But it was just such a beautiful sketch from such an obviously talented artist that I couldn't help but be overwhelmed with gratitude. No one had ever drawn a picture of me before, or been nearly so flattering, and so against my better judgment I wrote Will a very short reply, thanking him for the picture and then posting it the following morning. I knew to expect a reply, I'm not totally naive, but I didn't expect it to be so unhinged. Curiosity drove me to open his letter when it showed up in my P.O. box. I knew his handwriting from the very peculiar ways that he'd write the A and the I in my username, so I knew who it was from before I even opened it. It was even more flattering this time, and he talked at length about all the art projects that he was working on and all the artists who inspired him. But then, towards the end, Will wrote that he had a confession to make. He told me that since we'd started exchanging letters, his feelings for me had grown stronger than those he might feel for a friend or sister. He said that he had to face facts, and the biggest fact facing him at that current moment was the fact that he was more in love with me than he ever thought possible. The final 2 or 3 paragraphs were all about that love, how it had started, how it had developed, and how it burned up inside of him until he couldn't contain it anymore. I started to skim read, feeling this horrible kind of sinking feeling as I realized just how unwell Will really was. But then toward the end, I read that he'd included another picture of me, one I was quite frankly dreading to look at, but I did, and this is what I saw. Will had drawn me again, only this time I was naked, and I had a very large and very round pregnancy protrusion around my tummy. And then standing behind me, with his hand cupping my pregnant stomach, was a person Will claimed was him, and then at the bottom of the page he'd simply titled it, Our Future. I threw both the picture and the letter in my parents' kitchen bin as I was still living there at the time, and then I sat down at the table and cried. My mom came to see what the matter was, and we had a big heart-to-heart about the whole situation. Her advice was to not allow people like that to ruin a good thing that I had, and that I shouldn't read any more letters from this Will character who quite obviously belonged in a bloody loony bin. Famous people attract weirdos, she said. They always have and they always will. It's just something you gotta get used to while you keep yourself as safe as possible. And so, that's what I did. I just carried on with what I was doing and kept uploading roughly once a week. I didn't reply to Will's letter, I didn't reply to his comments either. I just tried to move on and hope that things would turn out for the best. Well, they didn't, and this is why. One day, I noticed that Will had commented on my latest video, and that his comment had gotten more than 24 replies from various other users. Will was complaining that I hadn't replied to a letter he'd written me, how he'd included a sketch of me that he'd worked very hard on, and that he was upset that I hadn't even bothered to express my gratitude for his effort and support. Some of my other subscribers had jumped in to actually defend me, saying that they'd personally received replies to letters or gifts and that he should just be patient because I was probably busy. Will was replying to every single one, highlighting how long it had been since he'd wrote to me and that it was unfair that other people should get replies and thank yous but not him. And he was doing it in a way that was not so subtly designed to cause conflict. I say that because not once had he mentioned the fact that I'd written letters of thanks to him. Not once, but twice. He also neglected to mention that he'd sent me a naked, pregnant drawing of myself with him cupping my belly and smiling as we stared into each other's eyes. Just thinking about it at that moment made my skin crawl, and knowing what Will was up to then made me really angry. But instead of replying to his comments to correct him and my many other subscribers, I consulted an ASMR creators group that I was a part of and discovered that I could just simply and obviously block him. You can't ever really completely block people from seeing your videos, at least not that I know of on YouTube at that time, but what you can do is restrict people from commenting on them. And they're not informed of the restriction, and from their point of view it looks like their comments are just showing up like everyone else's are, but in reality, they don't even make it into the comments section and they're filtered out before they can even appear. All I had to do was find Will's username, click the little icon by it, and then select Hide User from Channel, and he was gone. It was actually kind of stunning how quickly I was able to deal with that problem, or at least things seemed that way at first. Will kept on commenting from time to time, but he seemed oblivious to his shadow ban, and then one day, I noticed that he hadn't commented in a while. A few days stretched out into 1 week and then 2, and since I'd already blocked his email address on the account connected to my YouTube, his only means of contacting me directly became that P.O. box. I thought that he was either over me and my channel and had moved on to someone else, or I'd eventually get another letter in that box. It turns out it was the second option, and it wasn't a letter this time, it was just a postcard. Since he wasn't in the habit of sending them, it was the first thing that I picked up and read, mainly because the picture was so pretty. But when I turned it over and read the message, I felt a shiver run through me. All it said, in Will's telltale handwriting, was, "I know what you did." And as you can imagine, it made for a very deeply unpleasant discovery. But it wasn't remotely surprising, I guess. Like I said earlier, I'd already theorized that I might receive some further correspondence with this guy. I just didn't think that he had it in him to be so direct. It was mildly intimidating and frustrating, I won't lie. But it was also only a matter of time before Will figured out that I'd filtered his comments from my channel, so I was mentally prepared for some fallout, and I was actually quite relieved that all he'd chosen to do was send me a postcard with a mildly menacing message on it. He could have sent me another letter, or another creepy drawing. I mean, he could have sent me a nail bomb if he really wanted to, but he didn't. He sent a simple 5-word message, and that was that. And to be honest, I thought I'd gotten off lightly. He could make a new YouTube account, maybe create a new email account, and along with my P.O. box, he could harass me to his heart's content. But I knew his handwriting. I could block his comments, and I could block every single email address that he could possibly create with nothing but a click of a button. I was a mix of scared, angry, and tired, but I felt safe, and I thought things were pretty much over. But they weren't over. Not by a long shot. About a month later, I'd been to check my P.O. box a few times, and when each time I saw that there was nothing from Will, I assumed that he really had moved on. A little bit more time went by, and I'm still making my videos, doing my thing, and planning on starting an actual Patreon account, much like the one that you have on here, Let's Read, as I wasn't making a ton of money in the advertising revenue side of things, as ASMR doesn't really run a lot of advertisements. And my subscriber base was actually growing, though, and I was discussing collaborations with some big ASMR artists that would give my channel the boost it needed to actually grow. And rather adorably, one of my subscribers had knitted me another toy before sending it off to my P.O. box. Remember I mentioned that girl who knitted me the purple octopus? Well, she knitted me another one, an orange one this time, so the purple one would have a friend. It had taken a few weeks to get to my box, but I also got text alerts for delivery, so I'd know exactly when it arrived so I could collect it the same day. Eventually the day comes when I get a little text alert saying a package had arrived for me. I hadn't heard from Will in about 7 to 8 weeks at this point. There's been no comments, no letters, and certainly no emails, so I haven't heard from Will in about 7 to 8 weeks at this point. No comments, no letters, and certainly no emails, so I didn't have a reason to think that he'd sent me any packages like the one described. I had to run errands that day, so I zipped around town picking up a few bits and bobs and then walked over to the post office my P.O. box was in to collect my orange octopus. I walked up to the counter, said hello to the lady behind it, and then gave her my P.O. box number while showing her my ID. Normally the person would just walk off and retrieve my post, and then that was that. But on this occasion, the woman gave me a very nervous look and then asked to confirm my P.O. box number. I'd never had to do that before, and I was pretty sure that she'd heard me okay, but I didn't want to make a fuss, so I just simply repeated the number. The woman had a big smile when I walked up to greet her, but after just a few brief words, she looked very serious, almost frightened, and then asked if she could have a quiet word in private. I just knew that it had something to do with Will. But my first thought was that he'd sent me some kind of, and I don't really know how to put this, a disgusting letter or package. They'd received something intended for my P.O. box, and that something then started leaking or something, and they'd been forced to have it destroyed due to health and safety regulations. But that wasn't what she had to tell me. And by the time me and the lady had finished talking, getting a box of poop sounded like a considerably more favorable alternative. The nice postmistress told me how, not even a few hours before, a man had walked up to the counter and asked about my P.O. box number. He had a letter to deposit into it, but after handing it to her, he started asking questions. He wanted to know the name of the person renting it, how frequently they came in to collect their post, and what days of the week they usually did so. And the postmistress said that she told the man that it was against Royal Mail's policy to divulge their customers' personal information, but the man had insisted. He said something about how the person who owned the box was a close friend of his and that he needed to find them. When the woman pointed out that if they were a close friend, he should know their name, and the man became aggressive. He only chose to leave after she threatened to call the police. Then, instead of putting his letter in my P.O. box, she put it aside to give to the police since it most probably had his fingerprints on it. I remember feeling sick as I realized what had happened and who had visited her that day. I also felt like a complete moron for not realizing that the P.O. box numbers can be tracked to a location. Now, just for reference, it's only private companies that offer that kind of security, and you pay a premium for the privilege too. I found that out when I was looking into opening one, but in the end, there's still a shred of shame that flares up when I say this. I gave up. I decided I wasn't cut out for it, that I wasn't cut out for dealing with psychos like that, even if it was on an infrequent basis. I deleted my videos, deleted my channel, and although in the moment it felt like a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders, I still harbor a little bit of regret that I just gave up, burned my channel, and went back to working my normal 9 to 5. I've thought about getting back into it from time to time. and I could start a new channel. Keep my face and location off camera and offline, kind of like this channel. But every time I think about it, I inevitably end up remembering that picture Will drew of me, the one where I was pregnant, and each and every time, that snuffs out any desire I have in an instant. During the winter of 2015, 34-year-old Lenny Royal was living in Brighton, a vibrant metropolitan city on the southern coast of England. Lenny was originally from New York City, but after falling in love with an Englishman over a decade before, had been splitting his time between Britain and America while engaging in his lifelong passion of hairstyling. Yet Lenny was no regular hairstylist, and continues to hold a reputation as one of the most talented professionals on the planet. His clients have included the likes of Haley Baldwin and Sigourney Weaver, and since he could easily find work on either side of the pond, his transatlantic lifestyle was both viable and profitable. But towards the end of 2015, the breakdown of his 12-year relationship became the catalyst for a harrowing series of events. It's not exactly clear how Lenny's relationship came to an end, but by his own admission, it sent him into a deep and debilitating depression. Lenny was prone to such bouts of melancholy, having already suffered his fair share of personal tragedy. When he was just a boy, both of his parents passed away after contracting HIV, which led to the exceptionally deadly acquired immune deficiency syndrome, more commonly known as AIDS. Lenny's father was a heroin addict and contracted HIV through sharing used needles. He then unwittingly passed it on to Lenny's mother. When young Lenny learned that his parents were going to die, it terrified him. Then watching them slowly slip away had a profoundly terrible effect on him. Separating from his boyfriend during the winter of 2015 resulted in similar feelings of grief and loss, which in turn brought back terrible memories of his parents' passing. Lenny knew that he had to do something to shake the depression that he was feeling, so after a period of contemplation, he downloaded a dating app known as Grindr. Lenny was no doubt looking for what is commonly referred to as a rebound, a brief love affair believed to boost the recently rejected self-esteem, and in doing so, he matched with a 24-year-old Scottish man by the name of Daryl Rowe. Daryl, originally from the Scottish capital of Edinburgh, had himself suffered a rough upbringing. Although the details of his early childhood are murky, we know that Daryl was adopted by two foster parents named Jackie and Harry when he was still just a boy. His foster mother once described him as a really lovable boy who was good company, yet what's painfully clear is that they adopted an extremely damaged child. Upon arriving at their home in the nearby seaside town of North Berwick, Jackie and Harry noticed that little Daryl's body was covered in scars. They were also rather concerned that Daryl had traveled with not one, not two, but 120 Barbie dolls, over which he displayed a fierce protectiveness. Jackie and Harry tried to raise Daryl as best they could, and they spared no expense in the pursuit of turning the young man's life around. Then one day, when Daryl was in his early 20s, he announced that he was leaving Edinburgh and moving all the way down to Brighton in England. Although an educated guess, it's easy to assume that Daryl moved to Brighton due to it being a historical haven for young gay men. Oscar Wilde was a frequent visitor to the city, with one local historian explaining that Brighton has long been a refuge for those seeking freedom from the strictures of conventional society. He thanked his foster parents for everything they'd done for him, promised to stay in touch, and then ultimately relocated in April of 2015. Around 8 months later, Daryl and Lenny formed a connection on Grindr. Then, after an initial period of flirtatious conversation, Daryl proposed they meet. At first, the prospect of meeting him excited Lenny. Daryl was 10 years his junior, and knowing that he could attract someone so young and handsome made the older Lenny feel much, much better regarding his recently dissolved relationship. In fact, Daryl seemed to be in awe of his new match's age, experience, and glamorous profession. but the pride Daryl's charm allowed Lenny to rekindle may have seriously clouded his judgment when it came to what happened next. Daryl and Lenny texted back and forth for a few days, toying with the idea of meeting up for a date. But then one day, Daryl made a suggestion which made Lenny feel deeply uncomfortable. When the subject of physical intimacy arose, Daryl seemed to flippantly eschew the idea of using a prophylactic, or in other words, he flat out refused to wear any kind of protection. For Lenny, this was a definitive red line, and although he and Daryl had already swapped telephone numbers, he'd taken such offense that he began the process of blocking him on various social media platforms. It was only at the very last second that Daryl managed to salvage his attempt at romance when he gave a categorical promise to wear protection in the event that they became intimate. Daryl might have saved himself from Lenny's blocked profile section, but he was still on thin ice. So over the next few days, he worked to regain Lenny's trust by swapping a series of innocuous selfies with him. His efforts paid off, and it was around this time that Daryl convinced Lenny to share his home address. He later said the exchange of information was simply part of getting to know his prospective date, but just hours later, Daryl showed up on his doorstep. Naturally, Lenny was surprised by Daryl's sudden appearance, especially since he called his cell phone using a withheld number before announcing, "I'm outside your door." But somehow, Daryl managed to talk his way into Lenny's home, most likely through sheer force of flattery and possibly with a dash of emotional blackmail. Perhaps there was talk of a miscommunication, with Daryl saying how he'd come an awful long way just to turn around and go home again. There's no doubt that Lenny made a sizable error of judgment in allowing a near stranger into his home, and by his own admission, it was an extremely regrettable decision. Yet the price he paid is the stuff of nightmares. After a few hours of drinking and flirting, the two men climbed into bed together, and at Lenny's insistence, Daryl swore that he'd wear a prophylactic. Then once their lovemaking had concluded, the prospective couple engaged in deep conversation, with Daryl sharing his passion for veganism and juicing. Lenny then attempted to share some of his own passions, but shockingly, Daryl tried to convince him of the benefits of drinking your own urine. Things got a little weird, as Lenny later put it. Then I was like, okay, this is nice, but you need to go now. Lenny made it clear that he wasn't rude to Daryl. He simply informed him of some very real dinner plans that he'd made for that evening, thanked him for a lovely time, then politely asked him to leave. On the surface level, Daryl respected Lenny's wishes, but in the days that followed, he made it clear that he'd felt deeply disrespected. Daryl not only complained bitterly to Lenny, but he became increasingly erratic when he felt that he wasn't being given the proper amount of attention. To Lenny, it was clear their budding relationship had no future whatsoever, so after informing Daryl of his wish to part ways, Lenny blocked his number, preventing him from calling or texting. About a week went by when Lenny received a call on his cell phone from an unknown number. Curious, he answered the call only to hear Daryl Rowe's voice on the other end. "How dare you block me?" he demanded. "Do you honestly think that you can get rid of me so easily? You'll never get rid of me, ever. You're going to burn, Lenny. You're going to burn." And once it was clear that the sole purpose of the call was to unleash a torrent of abuse, Lenny Royal ended the call, then blocked the number. He believed it was nothing more than the work of a bitter former lover lashing out in spite. Little did he know, Daryl's words had a horrifying significance. 2 weeks later, Lenny woke up one morning feeling a little under the weather. He figured that he'd simply caught a cold and with the proper rest would most likely recover in a matter of days. But when a matter of days turned into an entire week's worth of malaise, Lenny visited a pharmacist to purchase antibiotics. However, after describing his symptoms, the pharmacist stringently recommended that he visit a hospital for a more in-depth diagnosis. Lenny did as he was asked and underwent a full checkup following a visit to his local GP. Then, when the results of various tests came in, Lenny received a call from his doctor. It was one that would change his life forever. Lenny, who believed that he was suffering from little more than a stubborn strain of influenza, was told that he was HIV positive. I felt like that was it. My life was over, he later said. I was crushed. Following the death of his parents, Lenny had moved in with an older cousin, who he later came to regard as his adoptive father. He was devastated, Lenny said. He felt like he'd failed to protect me from the very same thing that killed my parents, and he'd promised my mom I'd never suffer like she did. I had to tell him it wasn't his fault, over and over, but he still cried. He still said he felt like a failure. In the weeks following his diagnosis, Lenny made repeated trips to a local medical clinic to receive medication and examinations. Being the social butterfly that he is, Lenny often engaged the clinic's nurses in casual and sometimes not so casual conversation, as in one case where he shared intimate details regarding the events leading up to his diagnosis. As he spoke, the nurse Lenny was talking to turned ashen-faced, and at first appeared hesitant to speak before saying, "I really shouldn't be telling you this, but you're the fourth person that this has happened to in the last 6 months alone." Lenny couldn't believe his ears. Assuming there had been some kind of miscommunication, Lenny reiterated that in his deepest, darkest thoughts, he wondered if a former lover had deliberately infected him with HIV. There had been no miscommunication. The nurse confirmed that in the recent past, 3 additional men had reported being deliberately infected with HIV by a recent lover. But not only that, the same malevolent person had actually taunted them via phone call following their infection, hinting cryptically at the ordeals that awaited them. The first was a man in his early 30s, Stuart Roger, who made contact with Daryl using the dating app Grindr back in July of 2015. In a very similar fashion to his interaction with Lenny, Daryl was insistent that he and Stuart meet at the first available opportunity. He insisted that Stuart stop by his Brighton apartment, and when he did so, Stuart found the front door open and unlocked. "Just come on in," Daryl said via text message. "I'm waiting for you." Shortly after Stuart's arrival, he and Daryl became intimate, and as far as Stuart knew, Daryl had worn the appropriate protection. However, once their intimacy had concluded, Stuart noticed that a prophylactic device had been removed from his packet, yet appeared completely unused. Concerned that Daryl had somehow deceived him, Stuart sought assurance that the prophylactic had been employed. Daryl flippantly dismissed his concerns by asking, "Are you one of these paranoid people?" "Yes, I wore protection, so chill out." Once sufficiently reassured that Daryl had complied with his wishes, Stuart began attempting to engage his new lover in conversation. Yet when Daryl seemed much more interested in showing Stuart his favorite Pokemon videos on YouTube, Stuart suggested that they part ways and arranged to see each other again soon. Again, Daryl seemed to take the polite dismissal in stride, but not long after his departure, he called Stuart on his cell phone. Stuart assumed the purpose of the call was to arrange a second meeting, but when he answered his phone, Daryl remained silent. Stuart asked if he was okay, but again, Daryl chose to stay silent until he eventually ended the call without so much as saying a word. Having demonstrated himself unsuitable for a mature relationship, Stuart opted for no further contact with the increasingly erratic Daryl. But just 8 days later, he received a flurry of text messages from an unrecognized cell number. "You're a revolting jackass," one message read. "Ha ha ha ha. I'd taken the protection off." Stuart was stunned, but he didn't understand the message's true significance until a few weeks later when he began to feel gravely ill. The second of Daryl's more recent victims was a man named Peter, who matched with the young Scotsman after realizing they frequented the same gym. He was a good-looking guy, Peter later said. He was also very charming at first, but that all changed very quickly. Daryl repeated the pattern of insisting he and Peter meet as soon as possible, and then when they did so, he told Peter that he would not be wearing any protection during the physical intimacy, and Peter was hesitant. He knew the risks involved, but Daryl swore on all that he held dear that he was clean, and that any intimacy they shared would be safe. But afterwards, the same post-coital pattern played out. After displaying a shocking level of immaturity, Peter proposed that they part ways. Yet just days later, Daryl sent him a text message informing him of some utterly terrifying news. "I lied," the message said. "I'm HIV positive." Peter was horrified and asked Daryl if he was serious or was merely attempting to psychologically terrorize him in revenge for discontinuing their tryst. "He's making this up," Peter told himself. "He's just being childish." But Daryl was not making things up. He had deliberately infected Peter